John, I hope you realise that this was our fault. We sat down on a pokey little Doctor Who podcast and we said to Chris Chibnall, hey, put some canon in the show.
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon, good evening and good night. Welcome one and all. Welcome back. It is long overdue to The Beard and the Boyo podcast.
That's us.
Hello John, how are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Yes, the sun is out.
And I'm inside in a sweaty room recording a podcast. Of course, at the moment, obviously, we're currently all locked indoors due to a pandemic. Hope you're all safe and well listening to us. Obviously, you might be listening to this years later. And of course, as always, Mike, get off Twitch.
I think Mike will listen to this when he's not on Twitch.
I think he might. With that in mind, this is our first ever remote podcast. It's been a bit of a fiddly process getting John up to speed. For those who do not know John, he is a man of simple pleasures, but he is also a simple man. And why don't you tell them about your podcast setup for the sake of our audience?
Oh yeah, so to explain, I'm sitting in my living room with my laptop on a coffee table in the middle of the room and a big, long, shiny red wire leading across the room to me where I'm holding a microphone that has a sock on it. It's a Mr. Perfect sock.
That's the same sock you've been using since the demo test, isn't it?
This is my recording sock.
This is your recording sock. It has a title now, for goodness sake. So that's probably the happiest we're going to be during this podcast. So a bit of context. Obviously, Doctor Who Series 12 aired a couple of months back, but John has only just since caught up with the episodes now, hence why we're only just recording this now. John watched The Timeless Children this morning, correct me if I'm right?
It was absolutely this morning. It was the first thing I did.
So what we're going to do today is talk about roughly the arc of Doctor Who Series 12. A lot of emphasis on The Timeless Children on what it involved. But obviously we'll do like a rough overview of sort of the main beats of the series as well, just to sort of lead into The Timeless Children. And let's make no bones about this, our criticisms of The Timeless Children. Obviously, I haven't really discussed this properly with John. John, in a word, what's your musings on The Timeless Children?
I mean, it's hard to sum it up in a word, but if I was going to, I would just say, honestly, the main thing that irks me about it is it was pointless.
Yeah.
There was just
pointless.
No need for it.
Pointless is a good word. And it's at a point now, I don't know about you, because obviously, you know, you caught up with Doctor Who quite late, and you were saying to me, what is it? I wonder what it is that's so bad about The Timeless Children. My attitude to Doctor Who right now is just one of apathy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, you know, obviously I was very frustrated at the time, but it's at a point now where I just don't care. Like, something has been tarnished, my love of the show. Obviously, it's one of those, like, Doctor Who is forever changing, forever evolving, but there's something about what happened in this episode. Obviously, we'll go into it. You know, we'll discuss it as we build towards it, but it's the metaphor of painting yourself into a corner has never been more apt as far as I'm concerned. But we'll get into that. And I think first and foremost, something to remember here is that people might be listening to this and think, you know, Jake, this is a TV show. You know, there's bigger problems in life. Get over yourself. I think to those people, you are absolutely right. There are bigger problems in life. And that's why, you know, when the show you used to escape from your bigger problems with while growing up starts to, for lack of a better word, nosedive straight off a cliff, you are going to get passionate and you are going to talk about that because, you know, me and you have been fans of this show since, 10, 11 with the revival, you know, and obviously we knew of Doctor Who beforehand. This has been a big impact on our lives. And I don't know about you, but it genuinely just it gets me down thinking about this show right now, and the directions and the decisions that the current custodians have made.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because it's a little bit of a story really for me, obviously, because I was, as Jake's already explained, I'm sort of one of those people who like refuses to get caught up in the system and the kind of vicious cycle of like biased news and kind of capitalist control and all that kind of mind numbing brain dead entertainment. And to rebel against this system, I decided not to pay for a TV license. Also, I couldn't afford one, and so so obviously I had to wait until the DVD came out. But so obviously I went into this series kind of having had a long. Obviously, we all got quite a long break between series 11 and 12 because there was a whole year. But I'd had an even longer break, and I already knew that there was something controversial coming at the end, and I had picked up a few spoilers prior to, because it's just impossible to sort of go on the internet and not pick up occasional spoilers for stuff that the internet knows you're interested in.
Yeah.
And then so what I'd kind of gleaned from kind of opening articles that didn't say spoiler on them and then very quickly closing them when I realized there was going to be a spoiler. So from that, plus kind of the little hints we got, like obviously we had the Ruth Doctor, as I think we're calling her, coming in kind of midway through the series. I'd more or less pieced together what was going to happen.
Right.
By the time I was like, okay, I think I see where this is going.
Yeah.
And what I think is a real shame is, to be honest, I actually really enjoyed Series 12. Like having come off Series 11 feeling quite like you feel now, Jake, just quite, what was the word you used? Apathy, was it?
Yeah.
Feeling very apathetic about the whole thing. Series 12 really had done a fairly good job of almost winning me back.
I would argue, obviously, right, a lot of the bigger problems with our run of Doctor Who was that it was very safe, it was very plain. Like, Series 11, like we said in our previous podcast, it was very watered down. But one thing I had got used to was that we were probably going to get a very meh run of episodes under Chris Chibnall, a very meh attempt at a couple of series that we were happy to grumble about and then move on when the next showrunner came in and hopefully picked it up a bit. Series 12, I will agree, was an improvement over Series 11. Visually, I thought acting-wise it did step up a bit. I would argue after Praxeus, it entered arguably the strongest run of episodes in Chris Chibnall's and Jodie Whittaker's run.
Yeah, not that was going to be hard to achieve, mind you, but
of course not.
But yeah,
it was a step up. So I agree with you. Series 12 was an improvement. First and foremost, what were your musings on the Master? Because that was arguably the first big thing that Series 12 introduced.
See, I have mixed feelings about the Master because obviously it completely disregarded the Missy.
Yes.
Series 10, which on the one hand I think is a real shame. Yeah. But on the other hand, I think we always knew that was going to happen. I think the Master is always going to have to go back to being this evil psychopath in the same way that the Doctor can never actually retire and take up beekeeping. Yeah. So in many ways, Stephen Moffat had written any future writers into a bit of a corner. Their only options were to either get rid of the Master altogether or reset the character. Yeah. And obviously that could have been done by like stretching out like another 3 series story arc where they're kind of still trying to be good and then kind of something bad happened and it spiraled them down, or they could just hit the big reset button and never mention it. Yeah. So I kind of respect that Chibnall just kind of went, you know what, you all knew this was going to happen. Like, let's just hit the reset button and just forget about it. And obviously this is all assuming that the new Master is post-Missy as well. I mean, there's always a possibility that he's, between Sim and Gomez, or...
That's what the internet's quietly hoping.
Yeah, somewhere further down the line.
I think what stings is because Missy was arguably one of the Moffat era's like best characters.
Without a doubt.
And proof that, if you write it correctly, a strong female lead character can be a successful one.
Absolutely.
But so I think it's a shame to basically. I think I feel the internet's grief in that it's just a shame to turn the back on that character, And all it would have taken for me was a couple of lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
You know, from like Jodie Whittaker's Doctor to be like, we went through so much, I thought you changed. And then just, even if it was just a lazy, oh, I'll never change and stuff like that. I like, again, it would have been tacky, but I would have bought it. One thing that I will never forget is how awful the Master's reveal was.
Okay.
I sat there after the reveal and I was surprised because I didn't see it coming. But there was just, as far as I'm concerned, it was it says here in the notes that this scientist was very good at running. Ha, got you, I'm the Master. Like, it was just so, like, it almost put me off the series straight away. Like, it was just really tacky. Like, certain reveals of the Master I love because I then can go back and watch it again and go, oh yeah, look at all those breadcrumbs that are missed and stuff. But it just felt very left field. And like you say, I have mixed feeling because I like the Master. I think he chews the scenery a little bit. But I like the actor Sacha Dhawan. Obviously, he was in An Adventure of Space in Space and Time.
He was, wasn't he?
As the director, I think. I
like
the actor. I think in a lot of instances, he's actually, you know, he's a very good Master. He does bring some gravitas to the role. I think he looks the part.
Yeah.
I just think more than ever he's just being fed some very appalling writing.
Which I suppose you could argue for most elements of Chibnalls Who, couldn't you? You know, most of the components are fine, but
but yeah, that's my musings on the Master up to this point. Obviously, there's more to talk about with the Master in regards to the Timeless Children, but we'll get to that point. Then in Spyfall Part 2 was my first big grievance. Nuking Gallifrey from the get-go, again, was just so stupid.
Yeah.
And this arguably is the point we should be ranting about here. Because when Doctor Who was restarted in 2005, we began this narrative of the Doctor being among the last of their race. It was brought to an amazing conclusion 8 years later with the anniversary of the show, the 50th anniversary of the show. And we learned this is no longer the case. History was rewritten. Amazing payoff. And don't get me wrong, not enough has been done with Gallifrey since the Day of the Doctor. But simply removing the Time Lords yet again with a few lines of dialogue, regardless of how it was done, was just such a poor move. Like, it was cheap, it was lazy, and it disrespected everything the fans had been through since the birth of, since it came back in 2005. I think it was just straight up shocking. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, because this was one of the elements that got spoilt for me. Something else was happening. The Time Lords were getting wiped out again. And I don't necessarily have a problem with how they did it in the story because, you know, it was different to last time. Obviously, it wasn't like another massive time war. It was just the Master getting a bit annoyed and nuking everyone. And I guess because obviously Gallifrey hasn't been destroyed again, it's just that the Time Lords have been wiped out. There's plenty of scope there for them to come back and for it just sort of say, oh, yeah, some survived and now they've rebuilt it. You know, it's fine. But I don't like it as a plot point because, like you say, you know, we had this whole big reveal of like Gallifrey still alive in 2013, and then we've basically had one episode set there, and that was the wonderful Hellbent, of course. And then ever since then, we've been like, oh, this is exciting. Like, where's this going to go? What are we going to find next? And then nothing. And I understand the need to keep the Time Lords sort of in the background of the show, because if you show too much of them, it kind of takes away the kind of uniqueness of the Doctor and the Master.
Absolutely, it does. But do it in the right way.
Exactly.
You know, it's almost become like the Daleks. You know, like it's the same Daleks returning every series and then they're defeated. You know, it's the new Dalek thing. Gallifrey getting wiped out every other few years just to keep the plot interesting.
Yeah.
Just find a better way of doing it. You know, I like the idea that the Doctor would only return to Gallifrey every now and again because you are right. They are this very overpowered race, and if they wanted to, they could just, you know, start putting the stamp all over the universe. So I agree, it is right to keep them in the background unless you're going for a very Time Lord-centric story. But just nuking them...
Yeah.
Again, you know, bear in mind, it took Gallifrey to come back, you know, 8 years?
Yeah.
From the start, from Christopher Eccleston's Doctor. So
yeah.
it's just been, and then it's just wiped out again in 2 episodes. that's just lazy. That
It was, and the annoying thing is as well, there was no real need for it to be wiped out, for the timeless children thing to happen either.
absolutely not.
That could
Absolutely
have just
not.
as easily worked with Time Lords at full power than it did with them. In fact, it just feels like a budget cut, if anything else. It's like,
I would argue, and this is a point I wanted to go into later on, but it almost seems like Chris Chibnall is just really desperate to put his own stamp on the legacy of Doctor Who. He feels like he needs to leave a lasting impression on the show. But surely, like, you do that through really great story, not through, like, just putting in plot points that you think people are going to react to.
yeah. Like, I was sort of trying to overlook it because I was sort of trying to be a bit like, well, because obviously I knew something bad was coming. Like, I knew the timeless children were coming. And so I was constantly trying to sort of be like, you know what, I'm just going to go at this mutually. I'm not going to kind of make any prejudgments on this or anything. This thing's happened. I don't like it, but if there's a justifiable reason for why it's happened, for why it works in the plot, then I'm happy to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there wasn't really, but that was what I was trying to kind of think about, and maybe it's helped because by the time we got to the Timeless Children, I'd sort of accepted that Gallifrey wasn't there anymore, so perhaps I'm not quite as mad about that as I might have been otherwise.
Yeah, for sure.
So
then obviously we jump forward to Fugitive of the Jadoon, and we're introduced to a brand new Doctor, hidden away in the Doctor's past. At this point, I was like, great, this is really interesting.
Absolutely.
I thought the Doctor digging up the TARDIS in the back garden was like a really good moment.
Yeah.
I mean, my niggle at this stage wasn't, like a canon thing. It was more like a revelation of this magnitude deserved to be executed a hell of a lot better. Like, I just thought the direction, the writing, it was just still at a Series 11 level. It just had, like, canon to, like, paper over the cracks. I feel like my opinions on it are justified in the entire John Barrowman thing.
Yeah.
Like, it was everything I despise about the current approach. It was just poorly written, just to shovel the plot along. And it was like, look, Captain Jack is back. You like this character. And he didn't do anything.
No.
He just danced around in a set. Why wasn't he with the Doctor at any point?
Like, if he'd been used more in like if he'd come back for the finale, it would have been more justified. But like you say, he just basically showed up as like a glorified teaser trailer for something that was coming up later.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, it just seemed like it has a little bit of a Rise of Skywalker feel about it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of like, oh, so you didn't like that. Here's everything you ever wanted.
Yeah. 100%.
And it still doesn't really work.
No, 100%. That is a podcast for another time.
Yes, that is.
As I say, obviously, then I thought Praxius was rubbish, but then we entered this lone Cyberman arc. I didn't mind it. I thought the Cyberman was quite sinister. Ascension of Cybermen I thought was a decent episode.
Yeah, that was really good.
I feel like we needed a bit more of like a bigger picture to like understand the universe at large, but like I didn't, I was relatively enjoying it.
Stakes were high. Cybermen were threatening. The Gallifrey twist at the end, even though we kind of knew it was coming, was quite well done. Yeah.
I will argue the portal just conveniently pointing at Gallifrey was a little bit easy, and that leads me on to my other point in terms of the two-parter at whole. There are a lot of things in the two-parter that I would argue are big plot issues, but they're going to pale in comparison to the decision that was made, obviously, that we're going to discuss. So obviously in that we have death particles. I would also argue the random old geezer.
Oh yeah.
Who I only care about because he was in Game of Thrones.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he was the captain, wasn't he? He was Daenerys' captain before he got stabbed in series.
Oh, was he? Oh, right. Oh, it's been a while since he got stabbed. So.
Yeah. But I hate the fact that at the end of the episode he just runs in and saves the day. Yeah. Right when I thought the 13th Doctor was about to do something clever for the first time in her tenure. And like I say, these are all massive issues that Chibs is going to get away with because of in my opinion, the magnitude of the mistake he made in this episode.
Yeah.
And we can address that now because we've naturally came to the appropriate point. So essentially, as far as this episode is concerned, the Time Lords came to be because of one child standing outside a portal, waiting for a Shibogan to come and pillage their regenerative powers, forging Gallifrey into what it is today. Now, it's a bit naff, but I can get on board with that, because the idea that Gallifrey and the Time Lords are built on a massive lie which disgraces their entire race, that's logical. But then they go one step further, and the idea that this timeless child with infinite regenerations, who is essentially a magical space fairy who started the entire race, that person's the Doctor.
Yeah.
What, the Doctor is the timeless child.
Yep.
I mean, it knocked me speechless when I saw it. I honestly thought they were about to say that the Master is the timeless child, which for me would have made so much more sense, and you could almost understand the Master flooring Gallifrey in a rage because he doesn't know who he is anymore.
And could have been a really interesting arc for him as well.
And not only that, but would explain why he keeps conveniently coming back again and again.
Yeah.
It's a logical situation. It's a logical step to take. So obviously, but now we're at a point where the Doctor just can have infinite regenerations and started the entire race of the Time Lords. So, forgive me if I go a bit ranty here, but as I said before, obviously this is something that I've had a few months to sort of refine my opinions on. First and foremost, please tell me if you agree or disagree with this. Doctor Who canon is very fluid.
Yeah.
There are things that you can tweak, there are rules that you can bend, but surely there is a certain category of lore that gets filed under stuff we shouldn't mess with.
I would think so.
Fundamentally, Doctor Who. You know, we've been fed little bits throughout the run of the show, but not enough to fully grasp who the Doctor was before the show began. And I would argue, because not knowing is probably better than some random showrunner coming in and putting a horrible idea all over the first page. Like, it's worked for over half a century in developing an intrigue for the character and the show. Why would you change that? Because now we've got a horrible origin for the Doctor. And arguably not an origin that's even been explained fully.
No, I mean, it's a semi-origin, because I mean, we still don't know, you know, where she came from or anything like that, and obviously there's still a lot of missing years in there.
Of course there is.
So I think that the show can still call itself Doctor Who, you know. I think there's still enough mystery surrounding the character.
Mm-hmm.
But because I think, yeah, I don't know what I think really.
Obviously we have this origin now, and I feel like might be the worst attempt at explaining who the Doctor is, because first and foremost, the Doctor is a character who looked into the eyes of her people and said no. Like, fundamentally, at that character's core is an ordinary being who turned to the stars and said she wanted to help the universe. You know, she, he, they became extraordinary through what they did. Many of us could relate to the Doctor because it showed that greatness was not given, it was earned. If you think of so many children watching this show who grew up wanting to be the Doctor, they looked at the ideals and morals of the character, but now they're being told it's not what you do, it's who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's still the idea that, like, you know, the old history is still intact. Like, he still eventually stole the TARDIS and ran away. So there's still the idea that, like, the Doctors, they made that choice to kind of be who they were, and, you know, they didn't have to do any of that. So I guess the element that the Doctor kind of chooses to be who they are is still there. But the character has been given this additional kind of almost chosen one-esque sort of element that wasn't there before, or wasn't there in a particularly concrete way. You know, there'd been, I don't know if you're familiar with the Cartmel master plan.
Rings a bell.
And basically it was an idea, and I hesitate to say this because it sounds very, very similar to what's going on today, and it happened just before the original show was cancelled. But basically, during the Sylvester McCoy years, there was this plan to kind of expand on the Doctor's origin a bit,
Yes.
and
Yeah, I
kind
do
of
know what you're talking about now.
establish that there was more to the Doctor's past than we kind of knew about, which got cut short because the show got cancelled,
Yeah.
and sort of has been picked up in spin-off novels, but you know we can kind of give or take them as we choose, really. So it's not a completely new idea, but it's never been on screen this concrete before. And I agree that it does change the fundamentals of the character a little bit for, in my mind, no real reason.
No.
Because the thing is, like, the timeless child has layers. It's like an ogre. And on the one layer, you've got what it does to the canon, which, as I say, has obviously kind of fundamentally changed this character's origins, but in many ways is actually not going to make any ruddy difference.
No, because you've got Ruth Doctor who sits there and says, "Has it ever stopped you before?" So if the show's going to ignore these revelations going forward, why bother including them to begin with?
Well, I mean, because what we've effectively gone from is the Doctor is a Time Lord who stole a TARDIS and ran away and helps the universe, to the Doctor thought she was a Time Lord and stole a TARDIS and ran away and helped the universe. So it doesn't really make that much difference, all things considered.
No,
So
it
why
doesn't.
is it there at all?
I would argue all it's done is just throw up a load of plot holes into previous stories.
Yet why does the Ruth Doctor have a police box TARDIS?
I mean,
If she's
arguably that too.
pre-Hartnell, that was the main bit. I can just about buy something like, oh well, you know, after the Hartnell Doctor stole a TARDIS, that was what his old TARDIS looked like, and the TARDIS wanted to honour that, and she knew he'd like it. I can just about buy that, but you know, something big like that just feels like that should actually be addressed on screen.
Absolutely, it should.
Like, I'm
I
all for not
thought
spoon feeding the audience, but you know, there's some things we just, big things like that we just need explaining. You can't just
absolutely we
leave
do.
that to headcanon.
No, of course not. I thought the Ruth Doctor was going to be sat between 2 and 3.
Yeah, that was the big theory, which I really loved.
I mean, yeah, okay, fair enough. And that should have been the entire series, like, building around this point. I would argue that a lot of these issues, these massive game-changing elements of this series that are half-baked and underdeveloped. And, you know, it throws, off the top of my head, how about the fact that in the time of the Doctor, Matt Smith's Doctor is shown to be granted a new regeneration cycle? Were the Time Lords just gaslighting him? You know, if he's supposedly got infinite regenerations, then he didn't need to be granted a new set, did he?
Oh, I mean, maybe they took away his regenerations at some point. You know, when they wiped his memory of being the timeless child. But again, this is something that could have been explained in a line. You know, just say something like, "Oh, when they wipe your memories, they limited your regenerations as well." Like, it's something that could so easily have been explained, and it just seems to have been ignored.
And, you know, going slightly off topic a little bit, like, in my head, why even bother creating this Tech Taeun character? Like, why wasn't it just Rassilon?
Yeah,
Like, we know he's a shady dick. He had more than a hand in Gallifrey's dodgy past.
yeah,
Like, it would have tied in perfectly well.
yeah.
You know, why wasn't it him? Why did they need to create this character?
Two things I will say though. I was thinking about this, and like, I've got two examples, and they're not perfect examples. There's ways to pick holes in them, but hopefully they just kind of demonstrate the spirit of the kind of fan base and Doctor Who canon, and the notion that we can get past this.
Yeah.
So the first one is: did you know that the Doctor is half human?
That really weird tidbit that was introduced in Paul McGann's movie.
Absolutely, which has been ignored and obviously outright contradicted on screen since.
Yes.
So it's basically a fairly major revelation about the character that was made on screen, so it's undoubtedly canon.
I'm half human on my mother's side.
Exactly. Granted, it was in an episode that very few people remember these days, and was a line rather than a whole story arc. But effectively, people didn't like it, so it just got ignored going forward. And we've had things like the Meta Crisis Doctor and the Timeless Child, that have outright contradicted that notion. So theoretically, a similar thing could happen with the Timeless Child. Like, I'm not saying that we could completely ignore it, because it was quite a major plot point for this series, but give it a few years down the line, and I strongly suspect people won't be thinking about it much, and we'll just have sort of grazed over it a little bit and continued to move forward. My second example, and bearing in mind that these are not perfect examples, but my second example is the numbering issue that was created by the introduction of the War Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So the kind of, okay, so Eccleston is now the 10th Doctor, and Tennant is now the 11th, and Tennant's also now the 12th. And I remember when Peter Capaldi started, when we were kind of building up to his first series, I remember reading some fairly vocal comments about how he's not the 12th Doctor, he's the 14th Doctor.
Yeah.
Everyone getting into some argument about this, but again, that sort of seems to have disappeared now, and I've never heard anyone dispute us referring to Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor. So the fandom does recover, and the fandom does move on, and the canon, very much like time itself, just sort of sorts itself out most of the time.
I really want to be that positive about it, because you are right. Doctor Who has ignored things before. I would almost argue that in Peter Capaldi's second series, we had this whole hybrid arc.
Yeah.
That the Doctor ran away from Gallifrey to begin with because he was afraid of the prophecy of the hybrid having been shown it in the Gallifrey Matrix. That doesn't get mentioned again.
Nope.
And its fundamental core is you are changing why the Doctor left Gallifrey to begin with. That doesn't get mentioned. My only concern is this is a hell of a thing to try and retcon.
It's a bigger thing. It's much, as I said, that's why I said these aren't perfect examples, because this is much bigger than kind of all of those things.
Yeah.
And I do accept that. I do accept that it's going to be difficult for it to never come up again.
And my worry at this point is that we have another series yet of Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker. Like, how much are they going to... It's a difficult one. Does Chris Chibnall know how dissatisfied a lot of the fan base is? Or is he just listening to, people on Twitter, not really fans of the show who are like, yeah, love it, love the Master, whoa, yeah, and all that. Or is he aware that long-term fans of the show are not happy with his creative decisions?
I hope that what he did in Series 12 suggests that he is. Because, as I say, it feels to me a little bit like you said at the very start, we complained that there wasn't enough canon in Series 11. So next minute, Chibnall's, taking canon into account and absolutely digging it up. But, okay. But, when you think that, a lot of people complained about Series 11 not having much in terms of Doctor Who lore, and all of a sudden we've got the Master, we've got Gallifrey, and we've got the Daleks, and we've got the Cybermen, and we've got loads of references to the Silurians and the Celestial Toymaker and all this other stuff that I spotted nods to over the series. Obviously, it could just be that was the way he was planning to go all the time. You're just like, well, we'll have a bit of a quiet year, and then
apparently this was the long-term vision to address canon in a second series.
I mean, he says that.
Of course he does.
And Captain Jack brought back for a cameo, for goodness sake. I mean, fans were clamouring for that for years. So I feel like, obviously, he hasn't necessarily addressed fan concerns right, but I'm hoping that this suggests that he is willing to address fan concerns.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I'm sort of open to another series that addresses the Timeless Child, because I'm hoping there's an opportunity there to fix things a little bit. And, explain things like, did the Doctor ever have a 13 regeneration limit? Why did the Ruth Doctor have a police box TARDIS? And actually do something good with the plot as well. Like, he's brought it in, and it seems like, like you say, he's just torn up the canon for no real reason. And I'm hoping that he actually does have a bit of a game plan with this, and he's going to go forward, and without adding anything to it, actually make this revelation matter and give it some purpose. Mm-hmm. So obviously it could go one of two ways at the moment.
Of course it could. I think you raised a good point in our Series 11 review, which was it was our Series 12 speculation.
Woo!
In that you said how arguably if Chibnall doesn't know anything's wrong, there's no need to course correct, and they'll just carry on with their vision. My argument now would be that he can't be trusted with his vision, because his vision is terrible. Like, we were saying, can you just bring canon into it? And now we're sitting here thinking, no, not like that.
Not like that, not like that.
Exactly. So, like, how do you approach this? Is it too much to ask for a Doctor Who show that, addresses canon but doesn't butcher it? Was there no one in the office in this writing process thinking, this is probably a bad idea? I mean, for me now, the level of quality on the show, acting, directing, writing, and overall arc beats, it's like at a level of 13-year-olds in their dressing gowns making YouTube films. Its base core, it just doesn't seem like intelligent writing at all.
No.
I mean, if you strip it down to its baseline level, all these massive game-changing revelations to the Doctor Who lore, which I would argue should be developed over multiple series, not over a handful of episodes in one series, were basically delivered through dialogue from the Master.
Yeah.
Well, surely there is a more... These revelations, whether you like them or not, they are huge changes and are going to shake a character to their core. They should be delivered with far more gravitas than the Master just explaining the plot, than just dropping these huge lumps of plot progression. And at its core, they're just... Not only are these bad ideas, they're being delivered poorly as well.
I don't know. Yeah, I think I was just going to agree with you, to be honest. I do think the exposition-y bits were bad.
Regardless of the quality of the origin, why are these just shoehorned into a couple of episodes? This story deserves better than these writers. Not only is it messing with the story, but it's just not a good story.
No, it's yeah. I can't argue what you've said there, to be honest. I think that's
So what? Okay, here's a question. Obviously, you watched it this morning.
Yeah.
What was your initial feeling? Because obviously, I realise it's just been me speaking at you, and obviously, I've had a lot longer to think about it. But like, what you sat there, the end credits rolled. What was your where did your head go straight away?
Well, I think mostly my head went to a feeling of failure, really, because I'd sort of gone through all 10 episodes maybe over the last 3 weeks, and I really wanted to be able to come out of it able to defend it, or at the very least sort of say, I don't agree with that viewpoint. I thought it was fine. And I really couldn't. And it was so annoying because up until that point, as I've said, I felt that Series 12 was a vast improvement. The main thing that really bothers me about it all is that it was just pointless.
Yeah.
Like if you try and imagine the kind of three-parter, the sort of lone Cyberman three-parter, we'll call it. Mm-hmm. If you try and imagine that without the Timeless Child revelation, it's actually not much different. Like, just imagine, obviously, the series, you'd have to find some other way for why, Gallifrey had been destroyed, or maybe Gallifrey hadn't been destroyed. It probably would have worked just as well.
I would argue just removing Gallifrey altogether from this plot.
Yeah.
Like, it would give the whole the Cyberman story far more room to breathe.
Mm.
You could develop it further. The fact, they got rid of the lone Cyberman so quickly, just for the convenience of the plot, because he wasn't, there was no room for that character anymore.
Yeah.
I would argue that there was a great Cyberman story in there.
Yeah, and if Chibnall is doing something with this Timeless Child twist, then I'm all ears. But I'm just not convinced that... I'm convinced one of two things is going to happen. Either he hasn't really got any plan with it and he just did it for kind of shock value.
Yeah,
or,
I think that's what it is.
He'll once again, oh, fans didn't like that, so let's just sweep it under the mat. And either way, we've just had this big, completely needless change to canon for no reason. Whereas, like when I first found out they were introducing a new Doctor between 8 and 9, obviously the War Doctor, I was like, oh, I'm not sure about that. I don't see how that's going to work. But it justified its existence. Mm-hmm. I still wonder, why didn't they just put Paul McGann in that episode?
Yeah, of course. Right. Now, because you are right. Obviously, the original plan was they wanted just Christopher Eccleston to be the one who the Doctor who was in the war, and that would have made far more logical sense. But what the difference between that and the Timeless Children is that They made the best of the situation they had.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
made it seem like John Hurt's Doctor always belonged there. And that's, you can't knock it. John, it's almost to a point now where I love John Hurt's Doctor. He deserves his place on the mantle of, he has played the Doctor. It's almost like Chibnall's been given this plot point and it just hasn't been executed well at all.
Yeah.
Give us the Doctor's origin. It's a naff origin.
But then who gave him that plot point? Like, why?
I don't like to assume, and I don't like to point the finger, and I'm very self-conscious that I'm a white male saying this.
With a beard.
With a beard. But I can't shake the feeling that whoever at the BBC has been told we need to get it on screen that the Doctor's been multiple ethnicities and genders before, and therefore it's been shoehorned in, and we've been given this story as a result. I don't want to think that, and I'm very aware of how I might come across saying that. And I'm absolutely here to, I almost feel like I'm flogging a dead horse here. There's no problem with representation, I encourage it, but it feels like Chris Chibnall has been very compliant with the BBC's overly progressive agenda. I never like to say that. I almost disagreed with it to an extent in Series 11, but just such is the shoddy nature of this plot development that it's hard to see otherwise.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like, I really hope that's not the reason why this has all been done, but to be honest, I'm struggling to think of another reason why this was done. So, you may be onto something there, and I really want you to be wrong. But...
Yeah, I do. I want to be wrong too. I would love to say that at this point, Doctor Who is just being run by some awful writers who just don't get the show. There's an influence from higher up to sort of shape the narrative. And in the past, Doctor Who's been able to get away with it through intelligent writing. And, if you think about, the whole Daleks were basically a metaphor for the Nazis.
Yeah.
You get clever stories all the time that are, it hints at a message that makes you think. Whereas, obviously, we've argued the point in Series 11, it just laid it on thick. Like Arachnids in the UK with the Donald Trump, allegory that was just so on the nose. Surely the point is not to spell out the message, but make you think about the message afterwards.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of out. I'm out of ammo. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm laying down the sword. I can't fight this anymore.
No, and I remember you at the end of Series 11 when we were discussing it, and I was saying it's hard to see where they move on from this. And you bless you, John. You are so positive in your mindset, and your want to see the show get better, and it's a very endearing trait to have. I just can't see how the show gets better at the moment
without completely changing its tact.
It's one of those does Chris Chibnall either ignore this next series, or for me he just nurtures this abomination further, and we go even deeper into the Doctor's origin until it's basically spelled out and the show becomes Doctor, not Doctor Who, because there is no mystery left.
There's no need to. I feel like there's enough to be getting on with what he's introduced in the finale, if he even decides to do that. Because I'm assuming that I assume it's going to be a New Year's special. Will be mostly standalone because they always are. And then it's a case of, well, do we even pick that plot up, or do we just kind of let it lie? And either is probably a bit of a lose-lose situation, because like you say, if it gets picked up, what's to stop them from going even deeper into
this horrible mistake?
Yeah, or if it gets left, then it's just this completely pointless rag that's been upturned for no reason. And as I say, hopefully it's going to justify its own existence. But
one thing that really terrifies me,
yeah,
is this idea that not Chibnall's shown the door, but he gets to the end of his tenure or whatever, and a new writer comes in who's incredibly passionate about Doctor Who, and wastes 2 series trying to justify or retcon this, and and that's my worry. This isn't just affecting Doctor Who now. This isn't just messing with Doctor Who's canon over 50 years. This is messing with future Doctor Who as well.
Yeah, I hope it's not got to such a drastic point yet. Because obviously with the whole Gallifrey thing, you can quite easily just sort of explain, oh well, there were some Time Lords off world when when this all happened, and now they've come back and they've rebuilt everything and we're good. Particularly
I would love them to do that. I'd love them to turn around and say, you're not the timeless child. The master was just trying to get into your head.
Yeah, and it's more than that's more than I don't know
lazy,
if
but I can work with that.
Yeah, and I can see what I think is more likely to happen is that we won't hear any more from the Timeless Child, and some spin-off novel at some point will have that exact line in.
Yeah.
So I don't think at the moment there's any need to spend any time, fixing things. I think hopefully maybe Chibnall's next series will deal with the Timeless Child thing and develop that a bit. If it does, maybe it'll even get a bit more forgivable. I don't know. I'm open to the idea. The track record so far doesn't fill me with too much confidence, but
that's my worry. Like, I want to sit here and say, let's just keep the faith. He's obviously going somewhere, but he can't be trusted.
Yeah.
It is literally the pig on the barbecue from The Simpsons. It's just a little airborne. It's still good. It's still good. It's gone, Dad. I know.
But as I say, ultimately, I'm still willing to go back to my original point, which is the fandom has survived things like this before.
Of course it has.
And I think this is perhaps a bigger bombshell than we've ever had dropped on us before.
Would you say this is like the biggest thing, like the biggest negative impact that has happened to Doctor Who?
Definitely the biggest negative, yeah. I think there's been other things that have shaken up the canon before, but they've always complemented what came before rather than kind of tried to reverse it like this seems to be doing. But I do think we'll get through this. I don't think it's going to permanently damage the show. I think, give it a couple of years of silence and we'll suddenly find, actually, I kind of don't care about that anymore.
And that leads me into my next point, because we're coming towards the end of our musings now.
Yeah.
Where do you think the show goes next? Do you think Doctor Who is limping towards another hiatus?
I mean, I think this new iteration of the show is definitely closer to its end than it is to its beginning, certainly. I would not be surprised in the slightest at this point if whenever Jodie Whittaker chooses to leave the show, they said, you know what, let's just not recast. Let's just let it lie for a while and give it some time. That I would certainly not be surprised if that was the case. Because, I mean, the BBC doesn't seem to have much love for it anymore, let's be fair here.
No.
The attention that it's getting definitely seems to have kind of dropped off.
And in many ways, if you look at the numbers, sorry to interrupt you, if you look at the numbers between, because obviously one thing that you mentioned in when we discussed in Series 11 is like the figures had gone back up.
Yeah.
Compared to Peter Capaldi's final series, a lot of those numbers were coming from the very first episodes of Jodie Whittaker's tenure to be all, oh, what's this female Doctor going to be like? If you look at the numbers now, for the Timeless Children, it's like less than 4 million. Like, it's at a point where, Doctor Who is hemorrhaging viewers now. It's something that has to be addressed.
Yeah. And I do think in many ways a hiatus would do it some good.
Yeah.
I think it would give it some time to refresh itself, and it can come back with a kind of bold new vision like it did in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to say it. Like, I like to think this won't be necessary, but being realistic, I think that's
I agree. Like, how awful is it that as avid Doctor Who fans, the best solution we can come up with is for the show to go into hiding and pretend it didn't happen?
Yeah.
Like, how awful is that? This is like, our Rise of Skywalker. We've had our very own Kobayashi Maru here, of like, a no hope situation.
Yeah, and I mean, ideally, like you say, a competent... I don't want to say Chibnall isn't a competent writer, because he is. He's written some wonderful stuff over the years, and, I'm sure continues to. And I stand by the notion that all of this might not necessarily be his fault. But, so, I'm basically doing this like, look, Chris, if you're listening to this, and I'm sure you are, please don't hate me. Say somebody comes in who isn't... held back by the BBC's apparent, PC agenda. I'm not sure if that actually does exist, but read the fan forums and you'd certainly think it did.
Of course you do.
and is able just to kind of, create the show that the fans want. I mean, that would be the ideal solution, but I feel like that's a very idealistic world, isn't it? And that's very unlikely to happen. I feel like we should say something positive to finish off.
I got nothing. Like it's like I said at the start, it's just complete apathy. Looking at Doctor Who now, obviously I've dug up a very passionate response in this podcast, but right now it's like when I was growing up, it was very much like my passions were like Pokemon, Doctor Who. It's one of those like Doctor Who's just in the background now. It's not like what I think of when I wake up. Obviously, I'm 28 years old, for goodness sake. But it's not something that I get excited about anymore. It's not something that. Okay, let's lay the letter. Let's strip it down to its basic level. A great deal of our friendship is down to the fact that we've been making a Doctor Who fan series together. A fundamental part of who we are is this show. And how sad is it to say that, 10 years on from that unbridled love that I had for the show, I just don't care. The only reason I'm going to watch Revolution of the Daleks and Series 13, if and when it ever appears, is from potentially you saying, hey Jake, they've picked it up a bit, you should probably watch this.
Yeah, I'll try and do that for you if I can.
There's just no... I am the neutral planet from Futurama. I have no strong feelings one way or the other. And if anything, apathy is worse than hatred. Because hatred would show that I'm still passionate about it.
That's true.
Whereas I just simply couldn't give a monkey's what the show does now. You capped off our Series 11 review quite wonderfully when you said, as Jodie Whittaker said, the universe continues to surprise you. I would argue the sentiment, the universe continues to surprise or demoralise you.
But it can surprise.
It surprises regardless. Whether it's good or bad remains to be seen. But I think that is simply all we can do. We're not happy. We're even more unhappy than we were at the end of Series 11. But all we can do is watch and wait and see whether this car crash gets even worse or whether we can pull some sort of survivors from the wreckage, for lack of a better metaphor. How do you want to end your musings on this?
I'm done. I'm suitably depressed. I'm sort of sitting out looking at some fairly orange leaves that are outside of my window and just feeling a bit depressed, really, and remembering that the world I grew up in is dead and not coming back. So I suppose. No, it's true.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's just like I was saying before. You were one of the most positive people I know, and to hear you say that really does shake me to my core.
I mean, have you? Yeah.
There are good things to be had. I think more than ever, it echoes the sentiment of Series 11 in that it's just being let down some by appalling writing. And now that canon has been thrown in, turns out canon does not fix everything, because if you have appalling writing as well, if you address canon with appalling writing, you're just going to get appalling canon.
Oh, I'll tell you one bit I really liked. The transition at the beginning of Ascension of the Cyberman, where that Cyberman head floated towards the screen, you went through the eye.
That was excellent.
Yeah, like, apparently it's really hard for a camel to go through the eye of the needle, but it's really easy for a camera to go through the eye of a Cyberman.
You know what's incredible? This might be the first time you've mentioned something that wasn't a narrative element in something that you liked.
Yeah.
This is a collector's item in itself. And also means you're scraping the barrel in terms of a good story. When you're like, I like that Cyberman through the eye bit.
That was a good bit.
It was. As I say, decent episode, just let down by some shoddy bits.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're flogging a dead horse here.
Yeah.
Long and the short is, Doctor Who is not what we're used to. And if anything, after Series 12, it feels even further away from what it's used to. And arguably now, Chibnall has messed about with the show here. Like, I can't dribble over Peter Capaldi's Doctor without knowing that my favourite incarnation of the Doctor came to be through a Shibogan explorer killing children. That's what I take from this. And that makes me sad. And apathetic, as I keep saying. And despite your best attempt to try and end this on a positive note, I don't think there is one.
You've done it again. I keep trying to say positive things and you keep going back to the negative.
I'm very sorry. It just, in this case, and you can't even disagree with me, the negative outweighs the positive.
I'm talking into a sock.
You are talking... You know what? Let's end on that. Jonathan Bowen is recording into a sock. My least favourite thing is I have to edit our rambling, depressive nonsense into some sort of coherent podcast now.
Enjoy.
I won't, but thank you very much all the same. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. See you again soon. I need a beer.
I think I'll join you on that one.
Beard and the Boyo was recorded in front of a live empty space, starring Jake Saunders and Jon Boyo.
Also, Mike, get off Twitch.
Also, Mike, get off Twitch.